to ERPfixers 2020 webcast series. I'm Jess Carson, and I work with ERPfixers. Today, we're going to be talking about migrating to S/4HANA Finance. Our host today is Paul Ovejel. So, what is ERPfixers? We connect you with SAP experts to obtain quality immediate solutions for your SAP system. We consist of thousands of SAP freelancers globally in all SAP modules, and we're ready to help and assist with their knowledge in SAP. We offer online platforms, SAP optimization assessment, material ledger, S/4HANA transitional roadmap, and cost transparency reports. For more information, go to www.erpfixers.com. Welcoming Paul Ovejel today. He has worked as an ERP financials consultant since 1997 in both North America and Europe. He specializes in implementing the FI and CO modules along with their integrated areas for companies in various industries. He speaks at numerous SAP conferences, offers strategic and functional level trainings to companies, and is considered one of the leading experts on material ledger. Paul is the author of 100 Things You Should Know About Financial Accounting, Reconciling COPA to the General Ledger, Introducing the Material Ledger in S/4HANA, and Material Ledger in S/4HANA. I also would like to introduce Paul as the founder and CEO of ERPfixers. Take it away, Paul.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webcast. We're going to talk about migrating to S/4HANA Finance. And before I start, I just want to talk about why we decided to do this particular topic for this webinar. Of course, everybody knows what S/4HANA is, and everyone knows that at some point, all SAP customers will either migrate or will implement from scratch the S/4HANA system. I also know that everybody has heard about what the new functionalities in finance are for S/4HANA Finance. And I've seen a lot of very good material out there. We also have some very good material at ERPfixers. But what I noticed is that most of that material is based on what the new functionality is, how to use that new functionality in S/4HANA. I haven't seen a lot about the migration from ECC to S/4HANA. And I've also been asked some pretty basic questions from SAP customers about the practical and real-world steps of that migration. And what exactly does it mean? What exactly are people going to be doing during that migration? What does it involve? So as much as one can cover in an hour, I want to try to just lay that out and hopefully clear up some confusion and show what the steps are and some implications of what is being done. So this will take about maybe 30 to 40 minutes. I'll answer questions at the end of this, and hopefully just give people a good idea about the migration process and some of the practical aspects of it. So first of all, let's talk about the pre-migration steps that should occur before S/4HANA. So these pre-migration steps, which are well documented by SAP, include a number of different transactions and programs that need to be run in the ECC system before migration. Now, that term before migration could be as long as a year before migration. For people who don't even want to migrate until 2 years, you could do some of these tasks right now. Some of these tasks actually, when I started SAP, they were actually best practice processes that should be run either on a monthly or a yearly basis, or even more frequently than that. But some companies just didn't run them, right? Because they didn't seem to be any technical or business necessity to run them. However, before you move to S/4HANA, if you want to reduce the number of migration errors that could occur, then you need to run them as part of your preparation process. So I'll go through some of these tests, these pre-migration check tests. First, there's a pre-check for migration to new asset accounting. I'm sure everybody knows that the version of asset accounting in S/4HANA is called the new asset accounting. I'm not going to cover that in this webinar, but just know that there is a pre-check to make sure that your ECC system is ready for new asset accounting. And by the way, new asset accounting can actually be activated in ECC. You don't have to wait until you get to S4. If you're on, I think it's enhancement pack 7 or 8, you should be good to go for new asset accounting. The next thing is to activate the necessary business functions, and one of these business functions actually is new asset accounting. So there's some business functions that need to be activated to prepare the system for S/4HANA Finance. The next thing that should be done, and this one is, I'm sure every company would do this anyway, but it's important before an S/4HANA migration. Say you're migrating in April of 2020. You want to make sure that you have closed the period, the asset period for March 2020. So you need to definitely close the prior period. And you also need to close the prior year. So I know that some companies, it takes them maybe 2 or 3 months to finalize the year-end closing. This needs to be done before you do your migration. You need to run your fiscal year change program in asset accounting. You need to run consistency checks. These consistency checks just make sure that the data in your ECC system doesn't have any issues that could affect the migration. You need to run reconciliation programs between the general ledger and accounts payable and receivable, asset accounting, material management. And the reason for this is that in S/4HANA, all these different modules, general ledger, asset accounting, material management, they're all merged into one table. So in order to make sure that cohesive data is sound and doesn't have any errors, you need to do the reconciliation beforehand. And hopefully once you do that, if you migrate successfully in S/4HANA, you never have to do a reconciliation again because everything's in one table. But before that, you need to make sure the data in these different tables is compatible. You need to copy number ranges. If you've created any new number ranges or new document types which need those number ranges, make sure they're copied to the necessary company codes. You want to lock the periods in materials management module. You want to verify the status of held documents. So before you migrate, any documents that are held, any financial documents that are held, you either want to post those held documents or delete them. Do not leave them in held document status. You want to carry any balances forward to the current fiscal year. So like I said, if we're in April or May or June 2020 and you're, you haven't closed or carried forward your balances of 2019, just make sure that that program is run. If you use the ECC system, your foreign currency valuation program, you need to do this reset evaluation in the current fiscal year. If you're a new GL, you don't need to do that. This is really if you use classic GL in the ECC system. You need to close your FI and CO periods. You need to make sure all bad jobs are complete. You need to run the consistency check program, which is this FINS pre-check customizing settings to make sure all your customizing is in check. And you need to run the start check program. Now, just more information on these pre-migration checks. SAP has provided two key notes. There's more notes that SAP has on migration, but two very important notes before you migrate and during the migration are these. The first one is the note 2755360. Now, this is a relatively new note, but what it does, it's a more comprehensive check to ensure that there's minimal migration errors. And so, because before you had to run a whole bunch of different programs, but with this note, it's really as comprehensive as it gets to ensure that there's hardly any errors. This node is run typically in your ECC system or on any database. So it could be a HANA database or any other database, but you run it in that system. It allows you to clean up any issues. So if that program creates any issues or errors, the idea is that you go to your production system and clean up those errors and keep running the program until it's totally error-free. And on that note, I just need to say that one of the questions I've been asked about, and which shows how much confusion or lack of clarity there is in this S4 migration, is that in the S4 migration, during the period of time that you have the project, that you're doing the project for the S4 migration, most of the time you're working in a sandbox system. You're not working in your production system, right? That's too disruptive for obvious reasons. So you're working in a sandbox system, and these programs that we're talking about, some of them, you run them in the sandbox system and not in the your main system. Now, if you're in ECC and you haven't even started a migration, maybe you're a year out and you just want to run some of these things to make sure that the system is clean, then absolutely, you run them in your ECC system. But when you're in project mode in your S4HANA system, you're actually doing a lot of this in a sandbox system to start with, right? Because when you get to production, you want a minimal amount of time that you're running any programs in your production system. It needs to be a very short window, probably a weekend. And by that time, you hopefully should have cleaned up a lot of these issues. Right, so that first note was the 2755360. The second note is the 2714344. Think of this as when you're actually doing the migration in your S4HANA system, or in the sandbox to start with, like I mentioned, typical errors occur. And this note is a very comprehensive set of the typical errors that occur and how to resolve them. So once again, those two notes that I mentioned, one is 275360. This is implemented in your ECC system, and it checks the most critical data inconsistencies, which should be corrected. The second note is 2714344. This is in your S4 system when you're doing the migration, and this note actually helps you to it has solutions for typical errors that come up during the migration. Something else to note is that it's assumed that a new asset accounting has been activated and the preparation and migration of customization steps have been executed before these migration programs have been run, okay? Another thing that is run in your ECC system is the simplification item list. Now, what is the simplification item list? In S4HANA Finance, a number of modules, functionality, programs have changed, and there's a lot of different changes that have occurred. So SAP has actually created this program that checks your system and tells you what has changed, what is no longer needed, okay, or what is still needed, but has a replicating, has a duplicate functionality in S4, which you could use instead. So it really is showing you the changes that have been made and what impact that's going to have on your current system. This simplification item check is this report, which is this /SDF/RC start check. It's run in the ERP system, and it's part of the preparation. It kind of lets you know exactly what areas you need to focus on, or what kind of decisions need to be made around things that have changed, are no longer used, or are new. So that was the first section, which was basically the preparation for the migration, okay? And remember, this preparation is done predominantly in your ECC system. We did mention one or two programs that are in the S4 system, but predominantly in ECC. In fact, some of these programs you run them both in ECC and S4, okay? Now let's go to data migration. So now you're prepared. Hopefully your system is in good shape. Now you're ready to actually migrate the data. So before I even go to this slide, I'll actually leave it on the previous slide. Another confusion about converting to S4HANA is what exactly data migration means, or what exactly even converting to S4HANA means. The reason I say that is because there are two major migration steps when converting to S4HANA. They're both technical, but one is more from a functional side and one is truly technical. So the migration of the ECC system to the S4HANA system, that is a purely technical database-like step. It's one that I don't get involved in at all because it's normally a basis team, maybe sometimes an ABAP team with ABAP help that does that. It's not like a finance person or a controlling person or any of the other modules, right? That's strictly a database conversion and an application change conversion, okay? Having said that, that is done in the same project as what we're talking about here, which is the finance data migration, right? So and people use those terms interchangeably. You could call it a conversion, the first one a conversion, the second migration, or maybe even vice versa. But just remember, there's two main steps. One is converting from ECC to S4HANA, and the second is converting your finance data. All the other modules, for most of the other modules, once the technical step has been done, they're ready to go in S4HANA. But finance has its own conversion that needs to take place. And I just want to clarify, when I say the other modules are ready to go, they really can't do anything. The finance migration needs to be complete before anybody can use the system. But there's little that they need to do as part of the project. There might be some side projects that they're doing to improve things in the system, but they're not necessarily doing a migration like finance is, right? So where the finance business team, consultants, and things like that get involved is once the technical migration is done, then finance needs to now plan. They need to do their tasks, and that's what we'll be talking about. So I'm going to take you through some of the main tasks. Not all, there's quite a few, but let's just talk about some of them. So this first one is regenerating CDS views. Now, CDS views means core data service views. What are these? So CDS views are basically, since certain tables in ECC no longer exist in S4, SAP hasn't totally blown those tables away. Well, they have blown the tables away, but what they've done is very intelligently, they have recreated these tables as something called views. So they're not tables the way that they were in ECC. They are now views, and they are actually views of the major table, which is the Universal Journal but they look like they're the previous tables, right? They look like they are the tables in ECC, but really they're just a carving out of the Universal Journal, and they are technically called views. And the reason for that is because it custom programs that were mapped to these. That's what the CDS views are. They're for compatibility purposes. Now, those tables we're talking about, if they had application indexes that are extended in the ECC system, this regeneration needs to make sure the views are also extended as well. So it just makes sure that any of these tables that are replicated as views, right? If you have any extensions in the original system, this transaction, this regenerate CDS views, is also doing it in S/4HANA. Now, by the way, since we're showing part of the, this is the IMG, these are the steps that are needed for data migration. Just so you know, this step right here called preparation of migration of customizing, we didn't talk about that, and I'm not going to focus on that in this webcast, but it's actually a prerequisite to doing the data migration, which is down here. So there's a number of steps in preparation and migration of customers, which you need to do. Your customizing is now compatible with S4, and then you go on to the data migration. Okay, so this regeneration of CDS views creates an output, and hopefully it's all green, but it just tells you all the different views that have been generated successfully. Next is analyzing transactional data. Now here, the system analyzes if all the transactional data is complete and correct. Now hopefully with all your pre-migration checks and your consistency program runs and all that stuff, that should all have been hopefully cleaned up, so that when you run this step, hopefully you get either no issues or very few issues. Okay, this step is used in a test system typically just to make sure that all the FI documents are complete and they're correct. Right, so you run it and you use the results of this test to make sure that if there are inconsistent documents, you go fix them in your production system. So what normally happens is that you fix it to make sure that when you run this program, it doesn't have any issues. Then the next step is the start and monitor data migration. Now, if you've heard anything about an S/4HANA finance migration, this is what it means. This is the crux of what a data migration in S/4HANA Finance is. It's this one step called Start and Monitor Data Migration. When you click on it, you can switch to the Control tab of the screen and change for processing speed reasons, you can change the CPU utilization percentage, and then you can start the migration, which is up here. When you start the migration, it goes through a sequence of steps, and it tells you when there's an error. When there's an error, you need to make sure that you investigate what the error is and resolve the error before proceeding to the next step. Okay? It could be very dangerous if you ignore an error and proceed to the next step. It could be dangerous because, one, it could cause huge data issues if you do that. And secondly, in most cases, the system actually doesn't let you proceed to the next step if you haven't fixed the previous one. Now, there are certain errors that can be accepted if they're not relevant. For example, in this screen, when this was run, it checked all the different tables, and then it got to this point where it says there's no entries for company code 1000 in this table GLT0. Now, it so happens this particular system is on new GL. GLT0 is a classic GL table. So for an error like this, all you do is just accept the error. And so you click on the accept error up here, and you can move on to the next step. Now, in a perfect scenario, all the migration results will be green. In a real world scenario, what happens is that you do several iterations of the migration and keep cleaning up and fixing your issues until you get to the point that they're all green, right? So the major migration steps for the Universal Journal are the migration of cost elements, the technical check of transactional data, material ledger migration, enrichment of data. Enrichment is a term SAP likes to use a lot. It just simply means that if you have line items you're migrating and you want the population of extra fields on those line items, maybe internal order or even cost center or something else that wasn't in the original transaction, that's what enrichment of data does. The migration of line items, migration of balances. One thing to know with migration of balances, so with the Universal Journal, most things are line item based, but the system compares the aggregation of the line items to the balance of the line items in the old system to make sure they tie, because if they don't, the system is going to post some correction documents to make sure your balances and your line items are the same. Then the calculation of depreciation and totals values. Now, when all the activities are executed successfully, you're going to see the green light and you're going to have a process status that says finished. Now, note here, each of these steps is a particular migration process, each of them, right? And these are all, like I said, this is the main migration, if you want to call it cockpit, in S/4HANA Finance, which deals with the Universal Journal. There's other parts of the migration we're going to talk about in subsequent slides, but the main migration cockpit is the one you're seeing here. Now, these are the subsequent migration tasks. Now, subsequent migration just means things that are not necessarily like core to the Universal Journal, right? And you'll see some of them in the next few slides. These subsequent migration steps are actually positioned just below the main migration that we just showed you. So it's the same configuration path. You're just going down the list of the different steps to migrate. So the first one is the migration of general ledger allocations. Now, these are allocation cycles that really existed with new GL. Like if you didn't have new GL, you wouldn't even have any cycles. In fact, many customers have new GL and they don't use new GL allocations. Whether you do or not, it's still good to run this. And these are the allocation cycles that are in the Faggle Flex D table, right? That's from new GL. And what the system is doing is using this new view called AC.T, which is a totals table for the Universal Journal. Also, all field usage definitions in the field of Faggle Flex D are copied to the same fields in AC.T. This program is run initially as a test, and you have the log displayed to analyze any messages and either resolve them or just take note of any warnings. Once all the problems have been resolved, run the program again without the test run checkbox and just make sure that no problems have occurred. Again, if you don't even use new GL allocations, you should have no, it should have no specific detail. It should just be a green line. So once you've done that, just check the allocation settings by running transaction GCA9 and resolve, if there's any inconsistencies, just resolve them as described in the respective messages. If there's no inconsistencies, you'll get a message at the bottom that says the customizing settings are formally correct. So the next subsequent migration step is the house bank accounts. So with that, that's its own migration step, which is used to migrate existing house bank data into the bank account management master data. Bank account management, or BAM, is the new way of storing house banks in S/4HANA. assign an account type to all the accounts you want to migrate of the company codes you want to migrate them from, and migrate those accounts. So that's the column for account type right here. So when you've done this migration, the system generates bank accounts that are based on the house banks that you selected. You can monitor the migration status, and you can use the status icon displayed at the end of each of the house banks to see exactly what the status of the house bank is. So just to explain what the statuses are, if it shows green, so the button here shows green, it means there's a house bank entry linked to a bank account master, and the house bank is assigned to the bank account in the master record. If the status is yellow, it means the house bank account has already been migrated from a previous version of S/4HANA, right? But you still need to migrate it again, right? It means all was good, but you just need to kind of update it. If it's red, it means that the house bank entry is not linked to a bank account master record. So the next subsequent migration is for credit management. Now, what this does is, because the credit management module has changed from being in the accounts receivable module, it's now part of the financial supply chain management, or FSCM module. So there needs to be migration of your credit management module in AR to your FSCM module in S/4HANA. The migration is done for customer and credit control area. And all the things that you had in ACC, like credit limits, customer credit groups, credit representative groups, text fields, risk categories, they're all migrated in accordance to the assignments that you had in ACC in your configuration. Okay. Then you migrate the credit management exposure. This is done in two steps. First of all, it migrates the credit values of open orders and deliveries. And then also the payment behavior data from the credit management is recalculated based on how it was in the previous AR module. Right, so you migrate it and you see the status of the migration and if there's any errors or if it's totally complete. Then you initialize documented credit decisions. Now, sales and delivery documents that are blocked by credit management, they're managed with something called documented credit decisions. These can be initialized, so you can say, hey, whatever blocks or issues there were, we just kind of wipe it out and take it back to being normal. You can do that, and you can use the UKM_case transaction to recheck, release, or reject blocked documents. So we've done the prerequisites for data migration. We've actually seen the data migration itself. We've seen the subsequent migration steps. And now let's see how to complete the migration. So once your migration is complete, you literally need to go to a configuration step called Set Migration to Complete. And you do this only when you've finished all the activities required for a complete migration. And once it's complete, you've made sure that you've corrected any errors that exist. Right? What the migration setting to complete does is it does a completed check, a redirect check, it does an AC.gate count, and it checks any pending packages. And you see the results of what migrated tables are okay, as you see here, the asset accounting tables, the CO tables, material ledger tables, and the new GL tables, and tells you if there's any errors or not. And it takes you down each of those, I think there's about 16 universal journal steps, which it just tells you whether they were completed without errors, or if they had errors that were accepted, how many errors were accepted. Okay, well, that's the end of the presentation part of the webcast. Now I'm going to hand it back to Jess for any questions that have been posted during the webcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was a very interesting presentation. We will now go into the Q&A. I already have a few questions that have popped up. Our first question is, how long is a typical S/4HANA migration?
Well, that's a good question, and it depends on obviously a lot of things. What I want to caution against, because I've heard some implementation partners talk about a quick, their selling point is that it's going to be, they can do a very quick S4 implementation. As you can see, there's a lot of reconciliation, a lot of kind of checks, a lot of due diligence that needs to be done to make sure that everything is intact. And so I wouldn't expect an implementation to be any less than 6 months. I've heard some companies say they can do it sooner, but if anyone tells you that, I would ask the question, what does complete mean? Does complete mean just technically you can get from ECC to S4? Or does that mean all the reconciliation in the accounting modules and all that stuff that could potentially cause issues down the line have been resolved? Because there are a lot of steps that need to be, one needs to go through to ensure that. Obviously, there's factors as well. How long have you used ECC for? The longer you use it for, probably the more complex the migration will be. How many company codes, controlling areas do you have? How much custom built transactions or programs do you have versus are you using just standard best practice SAP? So various ways this could the timelines could go depending on your factors. I would say no less than 6 months. I would say 18 months is probably on the higher side. So anything in between, I think, would be a good guide.
Thanks, Paul. We have another question that popped up, and it is, are there any modules or business functions that need to be activated before converting to S/4HANA Finance?
The answer is yes. In fact, I showed that on one of the slides. I didn't say what specific business functions there are. I mean, just quite, one off the top of my head is new asset accounting. New asset accounting is something that's recommended that you can implement before S4. Some others are material ledger. Material ledger is mandatory for S4HANA, but you don't necessarily have to implement material ledger before S4HANA. I actually, in some of my other webcasts or blogs that I've written, I do recommend that if there's a business need for material ledger, implement it beforehand. It just gives you less to worry about or to have to reconcile when you're going to S4. There's some other new GL could be one. If you wanted document splitting, you could choose to do it beforehand, or you could wait and do it after. And account-based COPA is also one that I get a lot of questions about. Should I implement it right now, or should I wait? So some of those decisions are business decisions, and not necessarily like you definitely have to do it beforehand. What I would recommend more than just what modules to implement is, are there any tests you could do right now that would ease the burden of the implementation project? And most of that comes to cleaning up your data, making sure your general ledger is reconciled with all the other modules, making sure if you use multiple ledgers, do a reconciliation of different ledgers, right, to make sure that things are in sync. I think things like that, even if you're not migrating for another year or 2 years, would be useful to help you minimize the amount of project time for your implementation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. So another question, if you do not use credit management, do you still need to perform the credit management migration?
Yes, that is, you still need to perform it. There might be, I think there's several steps in credit management, so you don't need to do them all. I think the basics, there's one or two basic steps that you need to run through. Just, you'll see a green light, hardly anything would happen. But if you're not using it, that's fine, because you can always implement the new credit management after you've gone live.
Thank you so much. Question, does the S/4HANA migration also activate Fiori?
The S/4HANA migration does not activate Fiori, because Fiori is really a different it's a user interface. It's new. You could use Fiori on your ECC system right now, and you could have S4, and you don't need to use Fiori. You can use the GUI. So Fiori adds like extra. It gives you that better experience with the speed and robust functionality of S4HANA, and Fiori has a better user interface. It just gives you a much better experience. But these are not two mutually inclusive things. You know, you don't necessarily have to do Fiori as well as S4HANA. One thing to note, though, is that as more new functionality comes out from SAP, they're actually having them on Fiori alone and not on the GUI. So I would definitely recommend having Fiori as part of your S4HANA project. But just know that it's separate. It's not the migration doesn't impact Fiori per se. You need to make sure that whatever needs to be done to implement Fiori needs to be done separately, but part of the overall project.
Great, thank you, Paul. So we are kind of wrapping up on time. I've got one last question for you, and it is, if you are already on Simple Finance, would you still need to do the migration to S/4HANA?
That's a good question. Simple Finance is the earlier version of S/4HANA Finance, and a lot of that functionality, especially the merging of all these different tables into the universal journal, all exists in Simple Finance. So, do you need a migration? Yes, you do need a migration, but there are certain steps that you don't need to perform, right? Because there's some you definitely do need to perform, like you need to activate material ledger, you need to do certain other things, but certain ones like the customizing for general ledger, you probably already have that in Simple Finance, so you don't need to do that. So I can't kind of articulate all the differences, all the things that you do need to do and don't need to do, but just know that you do need to have a migration, but you will probably not be going through all the steps that someone coming from ECC would need to do.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you everybody who has attended our 2020 May webinar series. We have recorded this, so it will be available on our website. If you have any questions that have not been answered today, please feel free to shoot us an email and also visit our blog series on our website. Once again, thank you so much. We are ERPfixers, and our website is www.erpfixers.com.